Want to welcome you to this panel, which is really focused on ADM and news and media in the Asia Pacific. My name is Heather Horst. I actually wasn't the person who developed this panel. It's Haching Yu, who will be joining us online from, I think, Thailand. And Mark Andreevich, I think, is listed in the program, and he's been unwell. So I'm stepping in, and we'll try to kind of keep us on track today. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that we are carrying out this conference today on the unceded lands of the Gadigal people, and just wanted to pay respects to ancestors past, present, and emerging. I know that was the kind of theme of the past few days, has been really important in that regard, but it's quite important, I think, even in the Asia Pacific region. There's a kind of different tradition of kind of indigenous ownership, language, relationships, different models in settler colonialism. And so I think there's some interesting things to think with from there. So I want to begin today actually by introducing all of our panelists. So we'll start with a presentation by me, and I'm based at Western Sydney University, and then we will move to Deng, who is it Deng next? Yep, so she's a research fellow at RMIT University, and she'll be presenting on Vietnam. Then we'll turn to Adrian Atik, who is at the University of Queensland, and he'll be talking a bit about India, and then we'll turn to Haching Yu online, who's also at RMIT University, but again, will be presenting remotely. So I'm going to turn my timer on now. We're going to each kind of go back to back, and then at the end of the session, we will come up to the stage for any sort of questions as we go along. Okay, so today's presentation that I'm giving, I kind of promised to talk a bit about some of the work that we've been doing on a project called, it's a kind of mapping project called Decentering Automated Decision-Making across the Asia-Pacific region. And I promised Haching that I would actually talk a bit more about what we're finding across the region. I won't talk about all the principles and things like that that we'll be delivering in this report probably at the end of August. But one of the things that I wanted to sort of mention is that 3 of the reports that we have been doing have been based in the kind of Asia-Pacific region. So we have a report, for example, on China, a report on the South Pacific, and another report on South and Southeast Asia. One of the things so I want to kind of talk about today is one of the focuses that we have, which is really on the kind of decentered approaches that we've been taking in this mapping exercise, and really trying to emphasize the importance of articulating the very diverse goals, trajectories, and aspirations of automated decision-making as they unfold in practice. And so again, while I won't be able to go through these extensively, through this sort of mapping project, we've had a real political commitment to ensuring that we treat people who actually use ADM as agentive actors. This means that we are attending to all of the possible trajectories of ADM interventions, in addition to accounting for their kind of determination by the contextual forces such as the political economy and other kind of geopolitical structures. So as I mentioned, within the context of this region, and part of the reason why I wanted to kind of talk about this today is that we do get this sense that the Asia Pacific is sort of ahead of the game, and that we in Australia or other parts of the world, we need to kind of catch up, or that this is the sort of future. And what we're really trying to do is to kind of, one, account for the kind of more heterogeneous narratives about what futures might be unfolding, but also really take into account the fact that the region itself is not a homogenous region, that there is a lot of kind of diversity. There is the histories and kind of accountabilities there are incredibly important for understanding, the way that particular technologies sort of emerge, the way that particular kind of relationships to automated decision-making are kind of unfolding. So one of the things in addition to kind of emphasizing this sort of diversity, we want to kind of recognize that there's also different kind of stakeholders involved in this. So there's national and regional bodies, And in places like China, as well as Southeast Asia in particular, state-level planning and strategy documents often frame ADM technologies, AI, this includes AI, but also to a lesser extent, the industrial automation of things such as robotics. So these sort of strategy documents kind of enable countries to harness the power of the digital economy. So the transformative potential of these technologies is captured in the titles of state-led initiatives such as Digital India, which I think you'll hear a bit more about later, Digital Bangladesh. Similar sentiments characterize reports authored by international organizations such as the World Bank. And these documents often lay out the promise of the digital economy as the kind of next development in the industry. And you see this really in places like India, Vietnam, and Thailand. But they also, there's a kind of discourse about allowing the country to kind of leap over developmental steps to an economy based on innovation and technology. And you really hear these kind of narratives coming out in countries such as Cambodia and Bangladesh. So in this, the promise of the digital economy and the automated technologies that enable it, we sort of see earlier narratives of development being repeated. Yet there are significant differences in the way that countries position themselves with respect to the emergent digital economy. India, for example, seeks to be an AI garage for the world, offering cheap automation solutions for international customers. Thailand, on the other hand, has focused on supporting research and development in particular areas, such as medical robotics, that capitalize on its existing political economic position as a destination for medical tourism. So all of the countries in the region focus on encouraging foreign investment, although to differing levels or degrees. Bangladesh and Cambodia, for example, are heavily invested in leveraging advances in ADM by presenting themselves as having largely untapped and undiscovered resources for large tech companies, such as a large and cheap labor force in the case of Bangladesh, or a large market for digital services in the case of Cambodia. So just to give you a sort of flavor of what's coming out in the kind of mapping report that we are doing, I want to focus on 2 or 3 countries, we'll see how what time allows, in the region that are engaging with different strategies and approaches to media, news, and information infrastructure. And I should mention here, Adam has just walked into the room, that a lot of this work I've been doing, quite hand in hand with Adam. And so in some ways he should be up here on the stage, but I will be mischaracterizing some of the work he's been involved in, so my apologies. So the first country that I just want to talk about is China. And this example comes from the work of some of our colleagues at the Institute for Culture and Society, Yinghua Yu, Yan Wang, Ned Rossiter, Liam McGee, and Brett Nielsen, who have been leading a review of ADM in China. There's many things that come out in this review, but one example they give of the kind of local specificity of ADM comes through the review of the development of the local media industry. As they note, in particular, the gaming industry has been using AI developments to sort of develop things like virtual humans. Many tech companies, for example, Baidu, Tencent, and Bilibili, have already invested and developed projects in the kind of virtual people industry. And virtual singer Luo Tianyi, who's in this picture here, and teenage vocalist Lumos are examples of what virtual avatars that have been created and embraced by the Chinese cultural market. Their existence also points to the integration of things like 5G, cloud computing, big data, and artificial intelligence technologies with creative labor and youth culture. So from the perspective of fostering talent, which is something, one of the things that really comes out in their report is that there's these kind of high-level, first-level economic kind of cities that we hear about a lot, Beijing, Shanghai, or whatever. But there are also a sort of series of middle-level urban centers that are becoming, that are kind of framing themselves or pitching themselves for particular spaces to, for example, host the creative industries. And one of the things that they're doing, they talk about in this project is that we need to start looking at those other spaces of development and to actually see China, again, as not a monolith of urban sort of centers, but a series of, urban, rural, meso-level, et cetera, sort of areas. So I think I might just move on to the next one, just in the interest of time. So The second example that I want to bring in comes from the work of Adam Sargent, and it's really around this company called Blue Sky Analytics. Blue Sky Analytics CEO and co-founder Abhislasha Purwar describes the startup's mission as becoming the quote-unquote Bloomberg of environmental data. By this, Purwar means that Blue Sky Analytics aims to source and consolidate raw climate data into formats that can easily be used by companies, researchers, and governments. Blue Sky's position in India is crucial to its success in becoming a provider of refined data products. And part of what enables Blue Sky to take advantage of this position is the larger geopolitics of labor and development in India. After demonstrating a new product called Spacetime, which is a platform for visualizing air quality data, it became clear that the availability of cheap and skilled labor was directly responsible for the platform's short development time. So here we can see how Blue Sky's kind of what we're terming kind of data mediation strategies emerge out of much longer histories. India has long been a site of cheaply available skilled labor, specifically in the tech sector. And while this labor has largely been exploited by companies based in the global north, it is increasingly enabling small Indian startups to operate within the global economy. Notably, Blue Sky has effectively used its connections to centers in the global north, pitching for venture capital to funding at MIT Solve in 2019. In this sense, Blue Sky Analytics demonstrates how global south actors can leverage geopolitical inequalities in favor to redistribute, if not reshape, data economies. Unlike the case of global labor platforms, which often rely on digital labor from places like India, the case of Blue Sky suggests that Indian companies are able to be competitive in delivering key digital infrastructures precisely by taking advantage of lower labor costs. I think I just might skip over this last example of Fiji, which breaks my heart, but I'll do it in the interest of time. So in this very, very brief snapshot of two countries and this kind of hint at this broader decentering ADM report, my aim has really been to demonstrate the need to focus on how ADM technologies are put to use in diverse social, historical, political, and economic contexts. From the emergence of platform labor arrangements to digital contract work, ADM systems are reworked through imaginaries of labor, data, or profit. These reworkings are always partial, constrained, and tenuous, but to fully understand the forms of exploitation and accumulation that shape contemporary ADM systems, such negotiations cannot be ignored. Accounts that ignore the diverse routes through which ADM are being made in different places across the globe or reduce difference to developmental models miss the mark. Centering accounts on the use of ADM in different contexts foregrounds the diverse social practices that undergird these economies. So the aim here is not just to counter meta-narratives with local specificity, but rather, and taking inspiration from feminist critiques of capitalism, Anna Singh, Catherine Gibson Graham, and work that acknowledges the different forms of capitalisms, our aim is to provide a different account of the political economy of data and place in the kind of Asia-Pacific configuration.
Okay, so I'll also try and get through this a little bit quickly. It's a huge topic to kind of get across in a short space of time. I'm sure many of you here have also been thinking a little bit about what's happening in India in terms of the kind of scale and scope of automation and how central that's become, you know, to the political paradigm and the kind of everyday governance of the country. But, you know, the age of automation in India has unfolded in distinctive ways and at breathtaking scale. So when we talk about anything in India, we talk about scale. So if Aadhaar, as the biggest biometric platform, has only a 3% failure rate, that's great, right? But of course 3% of people being locked out in India means maybe 45, 50 million people. Right? That's where scale comes in. So digital transformation has been central to the social and economic policies of the current BJP-led central government and to the leadership persona of Narendra Modi, of course, from the kind of the famous holograms to the kind of hugs to now kind of bear hugs with Silicon Valley. And the ambitions of the flagship DI program are to institute the datafication of banking, citizenship, health and agriculture for 1.3 billion people, to optimize the value of those resources through algorithmic management. And at its 2015 launch, you know, there were multiple e-governance projects that were grouped together under 3 core headings. So digital infrastructures, governance and service, and digital empowerment. And that agenda was augmented in 2016 by the big push towards a digital transactions architecture, which has been the main focus of my research ever since, having been there on the day of kind of, fintech Armageddon in India. Since 2019, of course, also by the aspiration to implement national data sovereignty by holding all user data generated within India, within Indian territory, which is kind of, it's kind of a parallel to having what was the entire world internet in its first 10 years, and then building the infrastructure for that from scratch. Okay, so that's what's happening. But to date, the automation paradigm in India has not been about destroying labour power and negating labour costs, which of course we've been talking a lot about, but principally about increasing centralised control, reducing corruption and inefficiency, and gaining universal legibility and oversight of India through datification. So a fantasy that goes back to the days of the viceroys, actually. And there's also a critical geopolitical dimension as India seeks to develop an autarkic capacity in digital infrastructure and eschewing its dependencies upon US and Chinese tech companies and establishing effectively its own digital civilization within a multipolar internet. So there's a kind of larger kind of political and ideological vision there, which require vast industrial investments in fibre and 5G networks, in data centres, manufacturing and power generation. So hence why we have Mukesh Ambani here. There's really only kind of 3 companies in India capable of developing infrastructure at that scale. And it is those infrastructure interests that are really kind of driving the kind of backbone of this. And it is the kind of economics of infrastructure that pay for, Geo, for example, to give free data to 500 million people for however many years it needs to. So in India, the focus of debates on the automation of news media, we think about what's actually happening across the network, lies squarely in the machination of democratic process. Currently, of course, the 2 most critical domains are WhatsApp, whose cellular structure readily converges with the cadre structure of Indian political organisations, and with the kinship channels, and therefore aligned, of course, into the kind of caste system. It kind of occupies the space of the vernacular media, what Francesca Orsini once called the native public sphere in India. And its counterpart is Twitter, which enables the disintermediation of the fourth estate, empowering populism, narcissism and fascism in India, much as it has done across the world. So in India, Twitter is the domain of a political class numbering some 15 million in terms of active. WhatsApp guiding a mass audience of around 500 million, that is approaching half of the adult population. And as the much touted largest democracy, India has swiftly become the #1 site of electoral manipulation in the world. And about half the capacity, of course, of media and comms research in India is trying to kind of keep track of political discourse in this era of perpetual kind of contact and contest. So a View of South Asia study in 2022 estimated that 1/3 of the viewed content on WhatsApp is partisan political messaging. And the use of bots to manipulate traffic is extensive, unsurprising because India is the world leader in developing bot software apps. And that market has climbed according to Bloomberg, climbed some 20% this year on the back of ChatGPT deployment. So it's already really moving ahead in the things that we're kind of anticipating and talking about at this conference. Of course, bots amplify the dissemination of fake news, of doctored images and hate speech through social media channels, which makes network politics a central topic of academic study. But the raw political utility of manipulating public opinion negates the likelihood of any real effective interventions. In a large part because at the All India level, the BJP Information Technology Cell is the #1 culprit in the manufacture and dissemination of fake news, disinformation and doctored imagery. So we heard recently about the case of the Indian female wrestlers who were arrested and protesting against kind of sexual harassment by a member of the BJP. Their pictures of their arrest then had kind of smiles added to their faces to make it look like they were all doing it for a laugh, to kind of undermine their credibility. That was put out very quickly, fact-checked, made it across, of course, to the BBC. But, really, there are weekly instances too numerous to mention, targeting politicians, religious minorities, government critics, activists, etc. And the majority of this content is swiftly debunked because India is also the kind of core skills base for fact-checking. Yeah? But ultimately, doctored bitmaps and AI-generated images have particular salience in demographics where literacy rates are low and receptive audiences don't accept and usually don't even see fact-checking. So we can read about this on the BBC, but we're not actually countering the original message. And the cellular structure of the IT cell operations are specifically organised to most effectively utilise the convergence between platform affordances and granular political structures. So it's really interesting how the BJP reorganised an entire political party around the affordances of particular apps. Yeah. With 500,000 WhatsApp groups under management, targeting voter demographics down to the district and booth level. This is a vast machine, which means India is now living in the dystopian world of Castell's network politics and what Tabriz Niazi characterises as an age of digital propaganda. So notwithstanding the critical contribution of algorithmic management to this new age of live stream propaganda, it still requires massive manpower and expenditure to run this campaign customised to every corner and demographic of India, which makes democracy a significant economic overhead as political opponents adapt to the new battlefield. You know, maybe 10% of GDP gets wrapped up in the whole business of elections. On a case-by-case level, of course, the Indian judicial system has no effective means of prosecution that can operate at scale against misinformation or manipulation. You can't prosecute 500 million accounts no matter what people do with them. Now, the IT Act 2000 does give the government sweeping powers of intervention when it comes to digital platforms, but to date, these have only really been used in cases where content critical of the ruling party has led to complaints from its own elected politicians, which has resulted in self-censorship by US platforms, you know, as recently admitted by Dorsey and others. So the parallel existence of the BJP IT cell and Digital India as a kind of technocratic vision marks, you know, parts of the trajectory of the BJP from opposition and media-savvy agitation to techno-authoritarianism and the repression of dissent, you know, casting India into what Nitin Govil calls a right-wing populist techno-culture. So a principal vulnerability of the paradigm lies in the continuing reliance upon a small number of US platforms and their affordances. Thus the recent push to facilitate the rise of Reliance Jio as a national champion and to concentrate India's data architecture under a new public-private partnership. You know, US tech companies have in turn counter-invested into Jio to protect their core interest in the Indian market because, you know, for Meta and others, this is their largest market and their largest source of data. And the Indian government, through data sovereignty, seeks to position itself as effectively the data broker for all that information coming out of India. So consequently, as much as the ruling party relies upon digital platforms to maintain its political operation, the e-governance ambitions of India still rest upon US tech providers and the architecture of its own nascent super platforms. So the consequence of this is that in material as much as political reality, the governance of platforms becomes inseparable from the platformization of governance. You know, the government cannot deliver automation without the help of the platforms, but the government is also the regulator and the customer at the same time. So the launch this year of the National India AI Portal is indicative of a policy commitment and an ideological commitment to accelerating automation. And here AI applications are being touted as the solution to fake news. Yep, one paragraph. But given the laxity we've seen in India's bot economy and the interests involved, the promised guardrails against the abuse of AI seem unlikely to be robust, and a clear gap remains between the algorithmic manipulation of the public and the kind of economically significant automation that India really needs.
Thank you, Heather and Adrian, for your wonderful presentations, which set the stage very nicely for our discussion today. So for the time that I have, I want to talk about Meta's Instant Articles program and sort of reflect on the need to study automated systems in context. I'll touch on the context of Vietnam and Cambodia in this case because they were featured very prominently in news coverage about misinformation as part of this program. But really, the idea here is to reflect on how automated systems are implicated in different contexts, and how this implication actively shapes the trajectories of these systems. So, for those of us who are not familiar with the Instant Articles program, Instant Articles was a monetization program offered by Facebook, now Meta, in 2015 to news publishers. And it was shut down just 3 months ago in April. Now, Meta's pitch for this program was to offer news publishers a way to create mobile-friendly and fast-loading versions of their articles directly within the Facebook platform. It did this by inviting news publishers to publish their content directly within Facebook, rather than using Facebook as sort of a bulletin board to link to content on the publishers' websites. Now, the appeal for news publishers was that they were given the option to have an ad revenue stream on Facebook, in addition to the ad revenue stream from, say, Google AdSense, where publishers make money from the ads that Google displays on their websites. At its peak, the participants of this program included big names like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, BBC News, The Guardian, and so on. In late 2021, the MIT Tech Review published a big article on how Facebook was directly funding disinformation clickbait campaigns, as they called it, through the Instant Articles program. The report also shows that clickbait farms, as they called it, around the world seized onto the Instant Articles program and created a rather elaborate strategy to earn money from this program through automated means. The investigation was based on expert interviews, data analysis, and documents that were not included in the Facebook papers. And they found that Facebook and Google were paying millions of ad dollars to these informal actors. So how do these operations work? The strategy by these informal actors involved 4 key steps. The first step is to scrape and plagiarize content from the internet and store them in a database. The second step is to publish them on multiple websites at a time so that they have a place to stay on the internet and can be indexed by Google. The third step is to register them with the Instant Articles program and audience network to embed ads within these articles. And the last step is then to post these articles to a cluster of dozens of Facebook groups at a time and make money from clicks. Now, because this process is mostly automated, the kind of content that gets amplified through this operation tends to be low quality, sensationalistic, and false or misleading. What's more important about this automated process is it kind of does not matter whether the actors behind these operations understand the content that's being propagated or even speak the language of the content being propagated at all. The only thing that matters is that the content being scraped and republished gets a lot of clicks. And the more clicks they get, the bigger the payout from platforms like Facebook and Google through their monetization programs. So for this reason, a page being run from Vietnam or Cambodia could feature content from any number of languages, from English to Spanish, Russian, Tagalog, Chinese, Thai, and so on. So the same MIT Tech Review reporting found over 2,000 clickbait pages being run out of Vietnam and Cambodia in 15 different languages and successfully monetizing through Instant Articles and AdSense. These groups were found to be propagating misinformation about the Myanmar military coup in 2021 particularly, posting footage of purportedly live videos of what was happening on the ground, but actually were old footage of the crisis. Now, this sounds oddly specific, right? Vietnamese and Cambodian operations posting false videos about a crisis in Myanmar. But in truth, there is probably no pan-Asian conspiracy going on here. It just so happens that the crisis in Myanmar really captured the world's attention at the time. And so if these operations were to still be operating today, they probably would be posting videos about the war in Ukraine, for example. So Meta finally decided to shut down this program in April as part of its broader pullback from news-focused products. In truth, many major news outlets already parted ways with this program around 2017, so the program had already been flatlining with small, inauthentic publishers by the time this reporting came around. The death of the instant articles program left the micro entrepreneurs behind these lucrative operations with little option but to look for other alternatives to make money online, of which there are many. So I follow a dozen of Vietnamese community groups that organize around sharing tips on how to make money with instant articles and watch in real time the collapse of the instant articles market in Vietnam after the MIT Tech Review reporting came out. People were trying to sell their registered instant articles accounts, the entire automated pipelines for running these operations. People freaking out over reduced engagement and reduced paycheck, over their payments being blocked by local banks and so on. Eventually, these groups shut themselves down and people migrated to more well-established online forums to sniff out new opportunities to make money by running other informal automated activities. Now, on these forums, schemes for making money are organized in levels of difficulty, from easiest to hardest. So the easiest ways to make money online would be, for example, click farming and captcha solving. For those of us who aren't familiar, click farming is when you are hired to click on paid advertising links and paid around $1 for 1,000 likes, or following 1,000 people on Twitter, for example. Click farms then sell these likes and followers at a much higher price for a profit. Captcha solving refers to the informal operations that enlist human operators into decoding captcha libraries so that these results can be fed into an automated tool to circumvent captchas. And more advanced ways to make money online would include things like phone farming and cryptocurrency mining. Phone farming refers to the automated method deployed to exploit advertising incentive programs. Phone farms are setups where hundreds of phones are plugged into a power source to simulate actions such as ad views, clicks, registrations, install, in-app engagement, and so on, and would normally generate passive income for those who engage in this practice. Now, these operations could also simulate watching behavior to make it seem like someone is watching videos and the ads embedded within them, which is the source of the income. So the point I'm trying to get at here is that all these practices are linked to each other, and they kind of cohere around each other in the sense that people who engage in one practice are likely to also engage in other practices at some point. People who run instant articles operations don't just make money from running instant articles pages. They tend to be what I call serial micro-entrepreneurs. They're really good at spotting the points of friction that exist within automated systems and come up with ways to manipulate or circumvent these systems for a profit. They're not really quote-unquote dark actors who operate quote-unquote in the shadows, as popular news media would tend to report about them. They're usually people who are online a lot, have some technical knowledge, or simply who can follow instructions really well, because tips on how to run these informal automated operations are everywhere on the forums that I've been looking at. So I'm going to close with some preliminary observations. I think there is a real need to study automated systems in context, not just because we cannot arrive at a complete understanding of these systems if we only look at them from the context of their origin, or from a limited number of contexts with similar cultural, economic, or political orientations. The need to study these systems in context comes from the empirical reality that these systems have given rise to an underclass of serial micro-entrepreneurs who actively shape the design of these systems in response to the various ways that these systems can be manipulated. This underclass cannot be understood in separation from their context. In the context of Vietnam and Cambodia, for example, informality is an economic and social norm rather than an exception. So in some ways, you can always expect a proliferation of informal automated activities in these contexts, which then can have really unexpected implications for both the operation of these automated systems, which are conceived outside of these contexts, and also unintended consequences for our information environment. And I'll end there. Thanks.
So I think next we have Yinghua, who's not Yinghua, Hai-Ching, who is on Zoom. Let me just end once she's here. Okay, hello Hai-Ching, how are you?
Hi guys.
You can hear us. Okay, so I'm controlling your slides. So when you need me to move along, just let me know.
I need to move the slides very fast.
Okay.
Um, in China, people talk about convergence media in relation to the communications. The Chinese government is on accelerating the integrated development of media in September 2020 to ask in traditional media and the new media organizations and technology companies to break barriers and blur boundaries. Automated media refer to the convergence media across old and the new media, internet, terminals, apps, and screen resources and communication channels. You know, this is how it's defined in the Chinese context. Next, private technology companies like Tencent, ByteDance are stepping up efforts to make forays into the AI-generated content. The state-owned flagship media organizations like People's Daily have been experimenting with automated technologies in news production, distribution, and opinion management for a number of years. This is one of the examples. Tencent's AI Dreamwriter wrote the first report in 2015. ByteDance Xiaomi Bot published more than 450 automated sports news stories during the 2016 Olympics. Xinhua News Agency's AI journalist Magic generated more than 37,000 pieces of automated news content during the 2018 FIFA World Cup. Next, please. In 2019, Xinhua News Agency and Sogou jointly developed the world's first multilingual AI newsreader to report on the national conference. In the same year, CCTV's, China Central Television's AI algorithms worked with data like graphs, tables, etc., to extract and categorize news and videos about the National Day celebration on its website. And on the same year, in 2022, during the Beijing Winter Olympics, the first AI sign language interpreter was used to provide continuing services for Chinese hearing impaired audience. Is a technology jointly developed by with Baidu. So these are exemplary projects coming from resource-rich national champions in media and technology industries. They are projects to showcase China's technological capacity. They're not employed widely or nationwide due to the high cost. Next, please. Many of these exemplary projects are developed out of the public-private collaborations, like the case in India. In the Chinese case, there are 4 key laboratories, labs, I'll call that, in convergence media, authorized by the Ministry of Science and Technology in November 2019, to experiment with automating technologies in media production, distribution, and circulation, as well as opinion management. As you can see, the 4 labs are all governed by state-owned national champions, either directly administered by the ministry or Ministry of Education in this case, or by those so-called tongues and throats of the party. Next, please. People's Daily, for example, demonstrated its use of automating technologies in news production, distribution, analysis, and monitoring news during Chinese National Conference in 2022, utilizing the 5G network, 4K resolution equipment, augmented reality glasses, and artificial intelligence technology, together with this iMedia, which is the editing and the broadcasting platform, iNews, which is a content selection and recommendation platform, and iMonitor, which is an news effect and public opinion analysis platform. Next, please. It's iMedia intelligence system. Back, please, iMedia. No, sorry, next one. Yes, okay, sorry, you're right. iMedia intelligence system integrates facial recognition, text and voice recognition, AI video editing, automating subtitling, etc. in news reportage, information curation, and editing. Such a system automates journalistic tasks from data collection and analysis to the writing and editing processes to publication and the distribution of news stories. Its iNews search and a curating agent uses big data and natural language processing to aggregate and analyze required information on the internet. Human editors then input data requirements, and the AI editors would then automatically generate content. The system will also conduct online and thematic content and thematic analysis to form topics and themes that they think would be popular among the readers and audiences, and select and distribute contents across multiple platforms. Algorithmic recommendation is a defining element of Chinese news ecosystem. As we all know, there's lots of research in their field already. For the state-sponsored media organizations, it's key to boosting its relevance and attention. Next, please. Its iMonitor platform does news effect analysis based on opinion analysis across channels or platforms to identify the trends or the popularities of certain topics and monitor the user interactions and the comments. It's a platform of AI in public opinion management. In March 2023, the Lab of Communication Content Cognition of People's Daily issued AIGC-X, a deep synthesis content detection platform to identify AI-generated text, graphics, and video content vis-a-vis human-created content with an accuracy rate of over 90%. It tries to prevent the risk of forgery, protect copyright, and detect misinformation and academic fraud, which is quite rampant in the Chinese context. So as a part of the automated media ecosystem, these two platforms are mainly about public opinion management. Next, please. From now, I'll just talk a little bit more about AI in public opinion management, particularly in relation to computational propaganda, similar to the case of India that Adrian just talked about. AI seems like the perfect response to the growing challenge of content moderation on social media platforms. Globally, the push towards automated content moderation is often justified as a necessary response to the scale of social media platforms like, the Facebook and YouTube stand as the reason why AI approaches are desirable, even inevitable. Well, we often caution the moral and ethical pitfalls in automated content moderation in the West. In China, it is an unquestionable way of social media life. Earlier research has found that many of the identified techniques like fake accounts, opinion leaders, and the so-called 50-cent party were not automated. Researchers found little evidence of automation in state-sponsored propaganda across a variety of platforms, both in and outside China. But such a situation has changed over the last 4 years, particularly. More automation is used in domestic and international opinion management and content control to tell the China story well. During the I won't give more examples, sorry, I'll have to skip it. Next, please. While China may not be good at international communication, it is very effective in using computational methods to control, mold, and guide public opinion in China. There are three strategies used. Normally, I would call them blocking, flooding, and channeling. While previous efforts have focused on blocking or censorship, and flooding, meaning using irrelevant messages to drown out critical messages, new initiatives have been focused on channeling. State media outlets like People's Daily, Xinhua, and China Global TV use algorithmic models to censor unwanted content, identify public opinion, justify state narratives and sentiments on particular issues, and form plausible predictions on specific events. They also launch AI journalists or anchor persons to attract younger audiences, amplify message that is aligned with the state agenda. The new automated platforms like iMonitor that I just talked about and AIGC-X are the new tools in such efforts, and they enable the state-owned and controlled convergence media to identify and respond to trending topics quickly, sometimes using bots, and incorporate them into their channeling techniques to drive traffic to their accounts. So there's lots of research about bots already, how about bots are embedded in human communication network, and whether China has been using bots in transnational or in international platforms So I won't, there's lack of time, I won't go into that. So what I would like to say, you know, the counterbot army for robots, as employed by the platform like AIGC-X, is used to detect so-called malicious content and malicious thoughts in subcultural groups, apart from the major social media platforms. AI-driven public opinion leaders are tasked to engage in public discussion, political discussions, to channel political opinion and draw out criticism of China on social media. So thus, I'll conclude. The loop of automated media from production and circulation to computational propaganda is complete by and for the state and its close partners in the private sector. China takes a step forward, step ahead of other nations in using the all of the nation, all of the state approach in the ADM revolution. Thank you.